The cult of personality.
When CM Punk returned to the WWE at Survivor Series this year, a lot of folks thought that hell had just frozen over. The company even capitalized on the sentiment by releasing a new CM Punk shirt. Indeed, Punk's return to WWE was a moment fans thought they'd never see, and it created a lot of buzz on the internet. But this isn't the first time the company have surprised fans to an almost extreme level. Throughout the years, WWE have shocked viewers by pulling off unexpected returns and unexpected moments. And in today's video, we're going to look at other times WWE made hell extra chilly by either bringing people back to the company, making unexpected booking decisions, and things of that nature. First up, it's Nature Boy Ric Flair signing with the World Wrestling Federation. Ric Flair joining the WWF was shocking enough, seeing as Slick Rick was the NWA superstar of the 80s. But what was even more shocking was the fact that Rick brought the big gold belt with him. WCW Vice President Jim Herd refused to return Flair's deposit for the belt. The NWA didn't recognize Flair as their champion mere days before Rick was scheduled to appear on WWF television. But Rick still showcased the belt while working for McMahon, claiming to be the real world's heavyweight champion. Fans were very surprised to see the big gold belt on WWF television. Rick believed the belt was his property until he got his deposit back plus interest. So the WWF were given a great opportunity to show the belt off on their television program while claiming to have the NWA champion on their current roster. The move forced WCW to introduce a new heavyweight championship. It changed the path and lineage of what many believe to be the most important championship in all of pro wrestling, and it created a moment in wrestling history that fans thought could never happen. Bret Hart left the WWF in 1997 with a pretty big chip on his shoulder. After the well-documented Montreal Screwjob, Bret went to WCW while claiming he would never work for Vince again, and this sentiment was echoed by Bret over the years through interviews he gave and even through his own autobiography. Bret Hart's return to WWE seemed completely impossible, an option that was completely off the cards. So hell must have frozen over when a picture of Bret Hart and Vince McMahon shaking hands got uploaded to WWE.com. Bret had agreed to work on a DVD project with his old employer. It's since been revealed that Vince and company were preparing to release a not-so-favourable documentary about the Montreal Screwjob, and this kind of forced Bret to come back and help create a much more celebratory DVD about his career. But nonetheless, it was still very shocking to see Bret had come back to WWE for this documentary. Bret would then get a Hall of Fame induction, and a few years later, Hart would stand in the middle of the ring alongside Shawn Michaels. Bret and Shawn made peace live on Raw, something that Hart fans were surprised by, seeing as one of Bret's final statements in his book was all about how he would never forgive Shawn. And after this, Bret would go on to fight Vince McMahon at WrestleMania. It was shocking because of what Bret said during his time away from WWE. He was so adamant about never going back, but here he was, calling a truce and burying the hatchet live on WWE Raw.
No chance, so that's what you got.
Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon had one of the most heated and entertaining rivalries in pro wrestling history. Stone Cold was the blue-collar guy, while Vince McMahon was the greedy corporate boss who tried to make Austin's life a living hell. But somehow Stone Cold would always come out on top, and fans loved seeing Austin beat up the boss while drinking beers and raising hell. It was a rivalry that helped WWF put WCW out of business. It helped elevate Stone Cold Steve Austin while firmly establishing Mr. McMahon as the company's biggest villain. So imagine how shocking and downright weird it was to see Steve Austin and Mr. McMahon join forces at the end of WrestleMania 17. Vince helped Austin beat The Rock in the WrestleMania main event, and generally speaking, fans didn't want to see it. These two had put each other through so much trouble over the years, but here they were, celebrating together in the ring and sharing a beer after Austin beat Rock for the WWF Championship. Austin's heel turn got a somewhat mixed reaction. Personally, I enjoyed it, but others, including Stone Cold himself, didn't. While many think Mania 17 is the best WrestleMania of all time, the ending of the show does get called into question quite often, but still, it deserves a place in today's video. final episode of Monday Nitro, taking place days before WrestleMania 17, was another time that hell froze over. I'm not sure how I thought the Monday Night Wars were going to end, and I guess I could have envisioned Nitro getting moved to a different night, and that would have been the end of it. Corporate mergers and the will of certain executives meant nothing to us when we were just watching wrestling shows every Monday night and having a blast. So imagine what it was like seeing Vince McMahon appearing on Nitro and announcing that he now owned World Championship Wrestling. Eric Bischoff created a monster when he debuted Monday Nitro on TNT. From day one, it was already competitive against the WWF's well-established Monday Night Raw show, and for a long time, WCW destroyed the WWF in the weekly television ratings. At one point, Nitro did feel like a must-see wrestling program because you just didn't know what was going to happen next. And Nitro itself forced the WWF to update their programming in order to present a much more contemporary product overall. Vince McMahon announcing the purchase of WCW through a Monday night simulcast brought a lot of mixed feelings for both fans and superstars of WCW. There was shock, sadness, a feeling of loss, but there was also hope that things could maybe improve when McMahon bought the rights to World Championship Wrestling. It's easily one of the most important nights in all of pro wrestling history, and just like when Nitro debuted in 1995, the purchase of WCW changed the wrestling landscape forever. Bruno Sammartino had been extremely critical of Vince McMahon and the WWF when he left in 1988. Sammartino went on multiple TV shows to talk about drug and steroid abuse in the company, the quote-unquote vulgar storylines that Vince McMahon was presenting, and as the years went on, Bruno didn't like the fact that the spectacle of pro wrestling seemed more important to McMahon than the athleticism displayed by the guys in the ring. There were also some underlying business issues McMahon and Sammartino had with each other, but Sammartino remained very outspoken about how much he didn't like the WWF as time went on. He hated the Attitude Era. He didn't care for Steve Austin at all due to how Austin spoke during promos. He didn't like the fact that families with children couldn't attend WWF shows anymore. So yeah, there was no chance Bruno was ever going to get involved with the WWF or WWE ever again, right? Well, two things in particular would bring Sammartino back for a Hall of Fame induction. First of all, Bruno felt the company had done enough to clean up the drug use going on backstage when they introduced the wellness policy. And secondly, Triple H. Triple H was the man who spoke with Bruno extensively in hopes of persuading the living legend to make a return. Hunter's known for being quite the history buff, and Hunter understood how important Bruno was to the legacy of World Wrestling Entertainment, so it was Triple H who pretty much negotiated the entire deal, not Vince McMahon. No one thought in a million years Bruno would accept a Hall of Fame induction after everything he said, but Bruno received his induction in 2013. The Undertaker's WrestleMania win streak was as legendary as WrestleMania itself. Year after year, fans would tune into WrestleMania to see if someone had what it took to end wrestling's most celebrated win streak, and yeah, some superstars got very close. Undertaker defeated guys like Diesel, Kane, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Ric Flair, Edge, Psycho Sid, and CM Punk while making WrestleMania history, and it got to the point where The Undertaker winning at WrestleMania felt like a guarantee. You never expected the streak to end, and you expected Undertaker to one day retire with a clean WrestleMania record. At WrestleMania 30, fans were left completely stunned when Brock Lesnar defeated The Undertaker to end the dead man's win streak. No one saw it coming, and no one wanted to believe it either. I remember watching this match and not paying much attention to it because I thought the outcome was very predictable. My attention was drawn to something else when Brock hit that final F5, and I had to quickly turn my head to that TV when the referee counted to 3. Never in a million years did I think Undertaker was going to lose, and I always thought the undefeated streak would be something that stayed intact right up until The Undertaker ended his career. But the WWE surprised everyone with this booking decision, and still to this day, many fans aren't sure if it was the right thing to do. Personally speaking, if the streak was going to end, I always thought Randy Orton should have been the man to do it back at Mania 21, seeing as Randy was so young back then. Beating the dead man at WrestleMania would have made Randy the ultimate undisputed legend killer of the WWE, but as we all know, that didn't happen. Still, WrestleMania 30 provided fans with one of the most surprising moments in wrestling history when Brock Lesnar defeated The Undertaker. Eric Bischoff was once hell-bent on putting WWE out of business. Many ex-WCW employees, including Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, talked about how Bischoff would brag about one day killing the WWF thanks to the success of his Monday Nitro wrestling show. That, of course, didn't happen. McMahon and the WWF defeated WCW in the Monday Night War, and in the end, Bischoff did not kill the World Wrestling Federation. Things were very heated between WWF and WCW during the Monday Night War though, and McMahon was not a fan of Eric's business practices. Vince always felt that WCW were more concerned about hurting the WWF rather than making their own show better, and this turned out to be a very true statement that's still very relevant in today's pro wrestling landscape. Even though McMahon and Bischoff were bitter rivals, Vince still hired Bischoff as an on-screen WWF talent. Bischoff would debut on WWE Raw as the new general manager for the Red brand, and seeing Eric and Vince shake hands and hug on the entrance set was pretty crazy back in the summer of 2002. When you think about it though, Bischoff was the perfect on-screen general manager. He had success in WCW, he would do anything to beat the competition. He was a natural heel that complemented the usually babyface general manager of SmackDown quite well, and he also had a pretty controversial history that made him an interesting authority figure. McMahon said in an interview that if the tables were turned and WCW won the Monday Night War, he'd like to think Eric Bischoff would have given him a job in Atlanta. I'm not so sure if that would have happened, but it's very interesting to think about. Jim Cornette's easily one of the most outspoken names in all of pro wrestling, and he's also one of the most polarizing. While a lot of fans see Jim's takes as outdated, somewhat skewed towards the good old days, and even at times offensive, others appreciate the wealth of knowledge Jim shares with his audience through his weekly podcasts, and they appreciate the fact that he doesn't sugarcoat anything when sharing his opinions. While many wrongfully believe that Jim Cornette just completely hates AEW and the folks who work for AEW, Jim's also been extremely critical of WWE over the years. Jim's spoken on a pretty personal level about his experience with Vince McMahon. He's very honest about his opinions on Triple H. He's talked about his own treatment by the company and how working for the WWF made him downright miserable. And all of Jim's thoughts and feelings towards WWE have been made easily accessible through his podcast and YouTube page. He doesn't hide it away at all. Imagine how surprising it was then when Jim Cornette was asked to induct the Rock and Roll Express into the Hall of Fame back in 2017. Here's how Jim opened up his speech.
I'm Jim Cornette. This is a live microphone and the audio guy's on Xanax.
Jim did admit seconds later that this speech was never going to meet expectations fans had watching at home, but still, it was pretty wild seeing the outspoken Jim Cornette back on WWE television. I actually attended this Hall of Fame ceremony. I paid to see DDP's speech, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in what Cornette had to say. Speaking of AEW, anybody remember the time Chris Jericho appeared on Stone Cold's Broken Skull sessions? That was pretty unexpected, wasn't it? Jericho decided to leave the WWE when he thought he had done all he could do within the company. Vince had agreed to let Chris work for New Japan, and Jericho stated that Vince gave Jericho his blessing to sign with AEW, but Jericho also stated that Vince called him back the next week wondering if Chris could get out of his deal. This is all according to the AEW Restricted podcast, by the way, if you want to look it up. Many had this idea in their head that Jericho would snub WWE in favour of Tony Khan. This was amplified when Jericho would go on social media putting the WWE down while proudly waving an AEW flag for all to see. So you can imagine how people reacted when Jericho got interviewed on a WWE Network show by Stone Cold Steve Austin. Jericho explained that he and Austin wanted to do this podcast, and Jericho himself called Vince to see if it was okay. McMahon gave it the go-ahead, knowing that the episode would cause a lot of buzz. So Jericho, an AEW employee, gave an in-depth career interview to Stone Cold Steve Austin on a WWE-produced show. Jericho talked openly about leaving the WWE, his decision to work for All Elite Wrestling, and he also talked about his favourite matches and moments from his entire career. Imagine this happening during the Monday Night Wars. Imagine someone like Randy Savage or Kevin Nash coming over to the WWF to give an interview before going back over to Nitro. It just wouldn't have happened. I don't need to talk about how much of a shrewd businessman Vince McMahon was and how ruthless he could be when it came to building his empire. By purchasing other wrestling organizations, McMahon was able to acquire those companies' television contracts. So, for example, Southwest Championship Wrestling had a Sunday morning slot on the USA Network. When Vince purchased Southwest, he was able to put his All-American Wrestling program in that same Sunday morning TV slot. McMahon would do this again when he purchased Georgia Championship Wrestling. GCW aired the World Championship Wrestling show on Ted Turner's WTBS Superstation. So one Saturday evening, when fans were expecting to see NWA Wrestling from the TBS studios in Atlanta, they were instead presented with Vince McMahon announcing a takeover of the World Championship Wrestling program. Fans would call this evening Black Saturday. The takeover happened on the 14th of July 1984, and instead of seeing wrestling from the TBS studios, McMahon showcased house show clips from Madison Square Garden along with highlights from other WWF shows that aired on syndication and the USA Network. Needless to say, NWA wrestling fans were livid, and so was Ted Turner. Turner was under the impression that McMahon would create new exclusive content and matches for the Superstation, but Vince pretty much showcased a compilation of matches that already aired. Fans tuned out, Vince lost a lot of money. Turner introduced new NWA shows to counter the poor ratings McMahon was bringing in, and in the end, Vince would sell the World Championship Wrestling program to Jim Crockett for $1 million. Crockett would then air the WCW Wrestling program on Saturday nights, and the rest is history. This whole thing would create a rivalry between McMahon and Ted Turner, and we all know what happened there. Hell froze over though when McMahon appeared on the Superstation while announcing a WWF takeover, but not all surprises in wrestling equate to good things.
Whoa!
Many might disagree with this one, but I think Cody Rhodes coming back to WWE deserves a spot in this video. When you go back to the very foundation of All Elite Wrestling, you have to start at the All In event back in 2018, an independent super show that started off as a bet. A fan asked Dave Meltzer if Ring of Honor could sell 10,000 tickets, and Dave said it wasn't possible. Cody took this as a challenge and he responded by saying, "I'll take that bet, Dave." Cody, along with Nick and Matt Jackson, would then begin work on a self-funded event that had ROH's blessing, and this event would be named All In, seeing as the event itself came from this bet that Cody accepted. All In was very successful, the show even got on pay-per-view. It proved that there was an audience for an alternative wrestling show, and someone who noticed this too was Tony Khan. The success of All In would evolve into the creation of All Elite Wrestling, a wrestling company founded by Cody and the Young Bucks, with financial backing from Tony Khan. Cody was named an executive vice president of AEW, so it always felt to me like Cody would never leave the company that he helped create. Cody would end up leaving AEW to return to WWE at WrestleMania 38, and I honestly thought it would never happen. Cody still hasn't been crystal clear about why he left All Elite Wrestling. He said it wasn't due to money, it wasn't because of other AEW talent, but Cody did say it was a personal issue that led him back to the WWE. If you want to look this up yourself, it's on the Becoming Cody Rhodes documentary that aired on Peacock. Cody's WWE return was huge for the company, and it's still paying dividends at the time this video was produced. He's become one of WWE's most popular stars, so this very surprising return has done wonders for both Cody and World Wrestling Entertainment. When many people think of WCW, they think of Sting. Sting was the face of World Championship Wrestling through the highest of highs and lowest of lows. He was extremely loyal to WCW thanks to everything the company did for him over the years, and he was always the one man Vince could never sign. When WCW folded, Sting decided to stay away from the McMahon Empire even though he was offered a good deal. Steve Borden was concerned about how his character would get treated under the WWF banner, and he was also concerned that the legacy of Sting would get tarnished due to potentially bad decisions being made by Vince McMahon and company. Sting would eventually find a new home in TNA, and if fans wanted to see the icon, they could do so by checking out Impact. But eventually, Steve Borden decided it was time to wrestle at the Showcase of the Immortals, and it was time to debut in World Wrestling Entertainment. Sting said he was very impressed by the conversations and meetings he had with Triple H and Vince McMahon. He was excited to finally show up to the WWE and give fans a moment they thought they'd never see. And indeed, when Sting walked out at Survivor Series 2014, fans had to do a double check because it was just so strange seeing Sting at a WWE pay-per-view event. Now, many people did think that Sting was going to show up eventually, seeing as he got heavily advertised for the new WWE 2K video game. Seeing that commercial itself was quite a shock too, to be fair, but it doesn't take away from the fact that Sting actually appeared in a WWE ring, something the vast majority of wrestling fans never thought would ever happen. In the end, Sting was maybe right to have reservations about joining WWE. Many felt Triple H beating Sting at WrestleMania was the wrong decision, and I don't think many would call his short run all that successful. The NWO angle was what gave WCW Nitro the edge over WWF. The New World Order were portrayed as invaders at first, but legal ramifications meant that side of the NWO had to be toned down quite a lot. But seeing all these ex-WWE guys wearing the black and white while tearing through the WCW roster was actually pretty cool at one point in time. As time went on though, many would view the New World Order as a reason why WCW went out of business. The lack of direction the faction had certainly didn't help matters, yet the group still had this unique legacy of being both company saviors and company killers. Seeing as the NWO had helped put the WWF under some serious strain during 96 and 97, and seeing as the NWO wasn't a Vince McMahon creation, it was very surprising when McMahon announced the New World Order were coming to the WWF in 2002. If you take the NWO faction out of the equation, it was still surprising to see Hulk Hogan return to the World Wrestling Federation after leaving on pretty bad terms in 1993. The McMahon and Hogan relationship had soured quite a bit following the steroid allegations, and Hogan felt it was more important to retain his public image rather than remain employed by WWF. When Hogan came back, he arrived wearing the NWO black and white. It took a little time for the WWF to embrace the bigger picture of having the immortal Hulk Hogan back on their roster, at least from a TV perspective. But Hulkamania would end up running wild again in WWF, and many people never envisioned this happening ever again. If there's one thing we can learn about all these hell frozen over moments, it's that McMahon will always put business first. Vince had the ability to forget personal issues if it meant the WWF or WWE could benefit from bringing people back. The last thing I want to talk about then is the sale of WWE. Something that looked like a possibility before, but you still couldn't imagine it ever happening. I remember saying back in 2021 that I thought the company might be going up for sale. The reports coming out about internal restructuring and the releases of so many staff members was truly unheard of, and even folks in the comment section completely dismissed my presumptions. I mean, I don't blame them either. Vince letting go of his company seemed ludicrous at one point in time, seeing as Vince's whole life work and legacy was completely intertwined with WWE. The company felt like McMahon's baby, his creation, and he became a very powerful and successful businessman through the work he put into WWE Incorporated. Allegations against McMahon then came out, more restructuring happened. We had Stephanie McMahon selling her stock while also taking over from Vince and quickly resigning again afterwards. And while all this was going on, the company was coming under a great deal of public and corporate scrutiny. When news broke out that Vince McMahon had sold WWE to Endeavour, social media went into a frenzy. It always felt like McMahon would hold on to WWE until his final days on planet Earth, but the sale went through and McMahon would be named the executive chairman of WWE's parent company, TKO. Now, at the time this video is getting put together, the narrative out there is the TKO are trying to oust McMahon, and Vince might not be executive chairman for very long, but news surrounding the merger moves very fast. We are also in the age of misinformation getting accepted as fact if it gets shared enough on social media, so it's best to wait it out and see what happens. But all this doesn't change the fact that Vince sold his company, and this is something that many people thought would never happen. Use the comment section and let me know about other hell frozen over moments that I might have forgotten about in this video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Take care.